Greetings. This is the Counter-Racist Evolving Engineer Program. The acronym for the program is Cree, C-R-E-E, and that is my handle. The date is March 16th, 2020, approximately 3:40 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. I want to say thank you for listening, but a particular thank you to two gentlemen, one by the name of Doc Nwokocha and the other Makadu Drame. I think I got that correct. If I didn't, you gentlemen, please email me and let me know. I'd like to get it right. Because they're my very first patrons. You are my very first patrons, and it's quite something. Every time somebody says thank you or they appreciate, that always resonates with me. But yeah, it hits a little different when it comes with, a little bit of cash through Cash App. So I want to say thank you, because to me, like, it's a milestone, and I can't say that it was a small part. It wasn't a small part in inspiring me to do this video about this very important subject. So the subject of this video is its title, which you also see on the thumbnail, COVID-19 and the Black Human. And despite the fact that mainstream, as we're calling it, mainstream media is putting a pretty much black male face so far, but a black face to the disease in the United States, like 4 or 5 of the 6 or 7 most famous people who have had their positive COVID-19 tests revealed have been black, one being blackish, and that would be the gentleman on the bottom right, who's an NBA black basketball player by the name of Rudy Gobert, of mixed parentage. His mother is a French white woman and his father was black. I don't know the origin. But then there's, to the left, his teammate on that NBA team, which is the Utah Jazz, who also tested positive after being made to test upon finding out that Rudy Gobert, the man of mixed parentage, was positive. So his whole team and the staff was made to be tested in the arena in which they were supposed to play that night, and the opposing team as well. And there's a whole story to that I think is very interesting in relation to what this video is about, because this is not a hand washing, social distancing video. It's about how COVID-19 seemingly, like apparently from all of the statistics that we're being given, is having a very different impact on black people. Now, there are a lot of black people who have decided to be, I don't even know if they meant to be it intentionally, but they're sort of playing the role of Stephen in Django, in the sense that I don't know, they're being told. It's just like preemptively they're coming out and saying, oh, I've been hearing all these rumors that black people can't get the coronavirus, and you should know that's absurd. But I mean, of course that's coming in the context of all these statistics we're being given, that the place on earth with the largest number of black people by far, which is the continent of Africa south of the Sahara Desert, is basically got 0 infection statistically, just basically. And of course that's come to the world's attention. Everybody can see it on a map or so on. And so why wouldn't we question that? And then if you roll out for us, so the first one, who's a person who, after we see all these statistics that the black people in Africa are not getting it, and every other place in the world is getting it at a substantially higher rate, then if you roll out for us as the black face of it, somebody who's of mixed parentage, of course, they won't even have to be people who are frequent listeners to this channel or to other channels that try to differentiate people who are of mixed parentage and a different phenotype from black people. You wouldn't even have to be a zealot for that. You just, normal kind of logic is, if you look at the map and you see that, and then you roll out a mixed parentage person, it's normal to say, well, yeah, but that could be because he has a white mom, right? He even looks very different than a black person, an unambiguously black person. Certainly very unlike most of the people on the continent of Africa, like 90-something% of them. So just rolling him out probably, wasn't going to work. Now, I'm not going to say for sure if it was intentional. I'm just going to be able to read to you the statement that was put out by his team, the Utah Jazz, in terms of how the event supposedly unfolded that led to the revelation of Donovan Mitchell's positive COVID test his teammate, and you make up your mind, as to whether or not you think it's true. I think that several of the statements that were made are highly improbable. Now, highly improbable things do happen, and the more of those improbable things that happen at the same time, the more improbable it is. I mean, it gets exponentially more improbable because you have to multiply the statistics. But I'll get to that in a minute. So, you might be wondering, well, what is this picture on top of Will Smith holding Willow, his biological daughter? Well, that, if you don't recognize it, is a scene from the 2007 movie I Am Legend. And most of the movie was just Will Smith. So talk about life imitating art. Because from all of the available statistics, this is almost exactly, it has potential to turn into exactly that film. And I don't want to go into too much detail about the reasons that life often imitates art, but very much of it is not conspiracy. Now, conspiracies do happen for various things, but when life imitates art, in my opinion, it's rarely because of a foreshadowing of something that's conspired. It just has to do with the way the subconscious mind works and how an artist's mind is able to generate things from the subconscious that is in the general population. And they themselves don't even know what it is foreshadowing, but they pick up on things. So they tend to be a little bit ahead of the curve because they express the subconscious, and the subconscious at some point is going to express itself in a collection of conscious behaviors by a number of people, a lot of people, and then you get to see what it was that the artist was picking up on. But at any rate, it does seem to be like this. Now, I was mentioning like Stevens, and I hate to use the word Stevens and mammies and Uncle Ruckuses and stuff like that, because I'm not going to project it on a particular person, even if I mention their name. I'm just saying there are behaviors here and there where we've been conditioned by the system of anti-blackness, which is racism, to engage in. And so if the whole world is looking and seeing it might look like black people have some sort of innate advantage in what is being called a pandemic, we already know that there is hostility towards us, and so we already know that they're going to want us to distance ourselves from any such conclusion. So here you see a tweet by Simone Sanders, who is a top aide to Joe Biden, Democratic presidential candidate, frontrunner, in which he tweeted, "The coronavirus does not discriminate based on national origin, race, gender, or zip code." And you see that I had a response to that. The evidence thus far is that COVID-19 does discriminate, Ms. Sanders. So even if it turns out you made a true statement, so if in the end, after a few more months, it turns out that this coronavirus spreads just as rapidly amongst black populations in Africa or any place else, she may have made a true statement. But what I said is that she couldn't have possibly known that at the time that she tweeted that or retweeted it, because that retweet is basically her statement, since she added no commentary. So I wonder, what is your motivation for doing it now? Well, I think the motivation is we all have been trained in a system of anti-blackness to make non-black people feel comfortable. We never want them to believe that we know that it bothers them when we are considered superior in anything that's considered significant or important. And so we'll play down things, whether it's what we own, our acumen, our intelligence, our ability in any given thing. If you happen to be around people of the opposite sex, and there are other people of your gender around, and you look very attractive, that makes the people of your gender uncomfortable. So there are all kinds of behaviors, like being the clown and being the mommy and dressing down and all that, mammy and dressing down and all that kind of thing, that makes them more comfortable, because we know when they're uncomfortable, they're gonna make us uncomfortable. So that is what I think is behind Miss Sanders' tweet. But also, I've seen all kinds of articles online dismissing this, basically just saying, oh, we don't have any advantage. It's one thing to say, well, it's looking like right now we might have an advantage, but don't think you're completely safe. But no one is saying that. No one is talking. You will just see everybody's puzzled. That's all you'll see, is that people are puzzled as to why Black Africa has such low infection rates. They just can't figure it out. That's all you'll see, and you won't even see very much of that. So this is Rudy Gobert, the very first athletic face of COVID-19. And as soon as it was revealed that he had it, not long after, they decided to test everyone on his team. And that's when it was revealed. Because, we're saying, oh, well, but is he really black? So that's when it was revealed that his teammate, Donovan Mitchell, also had tested positive. And then after that, a number of NBA teams started testing players. I don't know if it's they had symptoms of something or they just routinely did. I couldn't find that on the web. But this gentleman's name is Christian Wood, and he plays for the Detroit Pistons, and obviously another unambiguously black man. So now you have two unambiguously black men who are the face of COVID-19 positive tests. And then on top of that, we learned today that Idris Elba, who's a British actor, but he's an American phenomenon as well. So now you've got three unambiguously black men, one blackish man. So that's, four in the black kind of category. But I really would, in the black kind of category, I really would leave Gobert out because I've measured him on a phenotypic scale and that we use here, that measures whether or not somebody's black based on how they look, and he didn't make it for me. But I want to talk about that to some extent before moving on to the statistics. And I spent probably 80% of the time preparing for this video with number crunching and double and triple checking my numbers. But I just want to spend a little bit of time on this. Now, all I'm going to say, I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to discuss the improbability that these statements are true. I'm not going to say that what kind of conspiracy there was. I could suggest some reasons for it, but I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying it's just very odd and very improbable. So here's the tweet that was the statement from Rudy Gobert, the NBA player who was first announced as the White Mothers. Here's the statement from his team that was put on Twitter on March 11th. Statement from the Utah Jazz. This morning, a player on the Utah Jazz tested negative for influenza, strep throat, and an upper respiratory infection. And that would mean that he was showing some sort of symptoms. Obviously, he was sick, right? This happens all the time. Players are sick and they may be listed as do not play because they don't feel well, or, maybe they don't want to play because they have something infectious that's not COVID. Or it's the same way with injuries. So they have a medical staff to determine what's going on with them, with their health. Okay. The individual symptoms diminished over the course of today, meaning March 11th. However, in a precautionary measure and in consultation and cooperation with NBA medical staff, so not just their own, not just that team's, but the entire league, the entire NBA organization, in consultation and cooperation with the NBA medical staff and Oklahoma health officials, the decision was made to test for COVID-19. A preliminary positive result came back right after tip-off of the Utah Jazz Oklahoma City game. Right before tip-off. So let me stop and just say the first paragraph seems highly improbable as true to me. So you've got this very, very top-level staff, very highly qualified staff, and they decide to do 3 tests for some sort of microbe. Influenza, strep throat, and upper respiratory. But knowing what's going on in the world, because they had already discussed at the time of that game, closing arenas and having the players play in front of no fans. So it was already, COVID-19 was already under big discussion, and had been for some time, big discussion in the NBA. So knowing that, you test your player for these 3 things, but you don't test for COVID-19 at the same time. Given the level of professionalism of that medical staff, what do you think are the odds that that actually happened? That they just didn't think to test him for COVID-19 at the same time, or didn't have access to do it? That's kind of hard to believe, because they had access to getting 58 players tested and getting the results back within a day, that same day. If they had the power to push that, why wouldn't they have the power to find out whether or not a player had tested positive for COVID-19 before filling up the arena? Before the players had gone out there and done their layups and started warming up right before the game. Does that seem plausible to you? It doesn't to me. It seems improbability to the tune of less than 5 in 100. I think those are the odds. The odds are 95 out of 100 to me that that's not true. Then in the second paragraph, they say that a preliminary positive result came back right before tip-off of the game. Subsequently, the decision was correctly made by the NBA to postpone the game. Then they say when it was determined that the individual, that's Rudy Gobert, person of mixed parentage, would be tested, when it was determined that he would be tested, not after he was tested, when it was determined that he simply would be tested, they say we immediately informed the league office, NBA office. So the league office knows now that they're going to test him. Now, league office knows that he's going to be tested. League office knows what his symptoms had been, and that he tested negative for all those other 3 things. And with all of the discussion of COVID-19 making games without fans in the stands, they decide to wait until they get a test result, to wait until the arena fills up with fans, and the players are out on the court. They decide to wait for that result before they decide to postpone the game, when they've just very recently postponed the game when Kobe Bryant passed away, and they're talking about closing arenas to fans? Does that seem plausible to you? Meaning highly improbable. Highly improbable. Again, I put that in less than 5 out of 100. Maybe 1 in 100. But then it's super unlikely now, because we have 2 items that are highly improbable. And so you have to, they amplify one another. It's like having a dime and a penny and you throw them up. What are the odds that both will land heads? Well, if it were just one coin, the odds that one would land heads would be 1/2, 50%. But when you throw up 2, the odds that they will both land heads at the same time is the product, or you multiply the probability of each doing it on their own. So 1/2 for the penny, 1/2 for the dime, 1/2 times 1/2 is 1/4. So when we're talking about 2 improbable events like this, 1 out of 10 and say 5 out of 100. So 1 out of 10 is like 10 out of 100. So 10 out of 100 for one event, and like 5 out of 100 for another. So that's 50 over 10,000, or 5 over 1,000. The odds are 5 in 1,000 that both those statements are true. Implausible, improbable things do happen. So I can't prove it. None of us can. Well, I mean, at some point, some investigative reporter might. But I'm just saying, I don't have the wherewithal right now to say that what they're saying here is not true. I'm just saying it doesn't seem like it's true to me. So then the question becomes, well, then why did they do it? What's the agenda? Because if it's not true, there had to be a reason that they did what they did and then didn't say the truth about what they did. Well, I think it's like what I said before. I think that they want us to buy in, just like homosexual men wanted heterosexual people to buy into the AIDS crisis. They want black people to buy in that we're just as much at risk as non-black people. They certainly don't want us to have any confidence in any part of our genetic potential. That makes them uncomfortable. And they need us to be fighting this just like they're fighting it. And they need us to be concerned about their interests. Massa, we sick. Again, I'm not saying that black people can't contract this virus, and I'm not saying we can't get very sick from it. I'm just saying from the available statistics, black people were very reasonably postulating that it is more difficult for us to at the very least get sick from it, maybe to contract it. But contracting it and getting sick from it are two different things, right? Because we now know that children are getting this stuff all over the place, but they're just not getting sick at all. And that the people who are most at risk from getting sick are very old people over the age of 65. But the older you get, the rates do increase at about age 50. But most of these deaths are for people who are over 65, because the real risk is underlying health conditions. And the older you get, the more your body breaks down, the more likely you are to have an underlying health condition. And just aging itself, really, at this point, is a disease, because your body systems start to break down, including your immune system. So that's a risk factor. So that's in terms of getting sick from it, which is the real issue. I mean, people may have a whole bunch of things they've contracted, but have immunity to, or just don't get them sick, right? So, but it's looking like, and I'm going to show you the statistics that everybody has seen on maps, but let's just look at the numbers so that we can compare them to other groups of people around the world. So yeah, I think that, rolling this guy out as the face of Black COVID-19, I just think possibly somebody made the decision that would not be convincing to Black people. So you wait to the whole game, you don't disclose before the game, and you wait until they're all in the same arena so that everybody has to be tested. And because the league has such a high percentage of Black people, they're not as much as Black players, not as much as before, because there are a lot of international white players from Europe, by the way, and Europe is the hot spot, and nobody has said that a European player with his contacts, with his family and so on, has tested positive. But at any rate, it's still, I forgot, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's still a very Black league. So if you're going to test the players, well, the odds are going to come up pretty high. That's your best chance of getting somebody who's test positive. As far as I know, Donovan Mitchell has said that he has no symptoms whatsoever, but he tested positive. And now Black people we can relate to this. And so now you can write all your think pieces. Black people could write all their think pieces about how we're not immune to contracting COVID-19. I'm just saying that that's one possible explanation for the statements here that are highly implausible. And now here, if you're going to test NBA players, if you're going to test NBA teams, yeah, high probability you're gonna snag some Black ones. So here's Christian Wood. So now you've got 4 out of the 6. The other 2 famous people are Tom Hanks and his wife. But even though there are far more white people in this country, you have more Black people in this country that we know of. This young man, Christian Wood, Donovan Mitchell, Idris Elba, and then the ish term for Rudy Gobert, and Charles Barkley, also an NBA Hall of Famer who's in his 50s. He's waiting on his COVID-19 test. So that would be 4 Black people and 1 Blackish person, even though we're only 14% of the population. And the statistics are showing that in Africa, where there's the greatest number of Black people, it just doesn't happen, or at least people aren't getting sick from it. Okay, so this was the graphic that I had to crunch numbers for in order to have an illustration of how the rest of the world's infection rate compares to Black Africa. Again, that would be the part of Africa that is south of the Sahara Desert. Well, so this was the rate of infection compared to Black Africa as of March 14th. So I started on this like on the 13th or something. And I did check the world statistics on this before I recorded for today, because I know that these statistics are a couple days old. And yes, the numbers have changed slightly, but it doesn't change the comparative rates, because the rate in what they call sub-Saharan Africa is still so small. So as of March 14th, there were 41 confirmed cases of COVID-19. And of those 41, something like 20 something were in South Africa. Now, South Africa is the nation in Black Africa that has the greatest number of non-Black people because of, the apartheid regime there. So there are quite a number of white people there. There are quite a number of Indian people there. And coloreds like Rudy Gobert who are there. Okay. And they account for like half of all of the cases on the continent south of the Sahara. So you've got 20 something cases left, and we know that at least two of the other cases were in Black African countries, yes, but they were not Black people. And even in South Africa, 22 of those 22 people, most of them, I think 17 of them were coming back from a ski trip in Italy. And that doesn't sound like that was Black South Africans. Now, what they're doing as they give these statistics, they're not giving the racial classification of people in Africa or anyplace else. But when we look at the pictures in the United States, you see what I just shown you in terms of basketball players and the actor Idris Elba. But what I'm saying is that even of the 41 cases in Africa, the majority of them are not Black people. Okay, so you just are hearing me say there were 41 cases. Well, if you have a way of enlarging your screen, you'll see that that's what it says in that top purple line. So that's how tiny the rate of infection is for Black Africa compared to the other parts of the world that I've put on this graphic. Because everything is going to be compared to that tiny little purple line at the top. And this is talking about the rate of infection. In other words, it's comparing the number of cases to the size of the population. That gives you a rate of infection. Okay, so when you compare the number of cases to the size of the population in an area, you get a rate of infection number. And it's, of course, barely visible in Black Africa. Then the area has the next lowest rate of infection the areas are South Asia and the Middle East, excluding Iran, which is often considered part of the Middle East. But unlike most of the Middle East, Iran does not speak Arabic. They speak Farsi, Persian. And some people would say they look different. To me, they do. They tend to have much sharper noses. And we do know that the word Iran derives from the word Aryan. And you know what Aryan has synonymously been used for. White. So South America and the Middle East have rates that are significantly higher than Black Africa. Significantly. But they're in that green line right there. Their rates are 6.4 and 6.7 times respectively compared to Black Africa. And now South Asia might actually have a larger comparative rate because a lot of people are saying they have a low testing rate, which is not true for Africa, by the way. I'll get to that in a minute. Not true for Black Africa, but at any rate, 6.4 to 6.7 times. Now, do you realize that in medical literature, if you have a greater risk rate for some condition, whether it's heart attack or stroke or whatever, tuberculosis or what, usually a significant risk is like 10, 15, 20, 30 is outrageous. It's an outrageously greater risk. 50 is like, oh my God, it's almost a 1-to-1. You just don't find that. Like we're talking about percentages, 20 to 30%. We're way off that here, even with the next most spared group of people. Because when you're talking about 6 or 7 times, you have to realize that when you're talking about percentage, you have to multiply that by 100. So that's 600 to 700. 600 to 700% as likely as Black Africa to test positive. 600 to 700%. Way past the significant level in biological sciences of 15, 20, 30% risk. And that's just the next most spared population. Then the third most spared is Latin America, but excluding the Black Caribbean nations, which also have a teeny tiny rate of infection. So we're just talking about Latin America that has a lot of mestizos, mulattoes, and white folks in it. Their rate compared to Black Africa is 14 times. So 1,400 times the rate of infection compared to Black Africa. 1,400, better correct myself, 1,400% as much, not times. 14 times is equal to 1,400% as much. So then the fourth most spared population is the USA. Fourth most spared compared to Black Africa. But the USA's population, which has about 14% Black people in it, some of whom are not phenotypically Black, the population here is 217, the rate of infection is 217 times the rate compared to Black Africa. 217 times. Again, let's convert that to percentage. That would be 21,700%. 21,700% as likely to have contracted COVID-19 as Black Africa. And people are, we haven't even gotten to the bottom of this thing, of this graphic. And people are acting like it's ridiculous for us to be talking about any difference between the way COVID-19 is hitting Black people and the way that it's hitting non-Black people. And let me go back to the thumbnail for just a second. In terms of life seeming to be imitating art. Because in I Am Legend, if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. You know, where Will Smith is there holding his daughter Willow 17 years ago. One of the things that happens when the people in this film get sick and almost all die is that they lose all their pigmentation. They demelanize. So you see how close this is when you start looking at this graphic? It's kind of chilling. Okay, so then after the USA, 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth most spared population is Iran. We all know the infection rate is very high there. So Iran, the Persians over there, have a rate of infection that is 1,000 times the rate compared to Black Africa. 1,000 times. So that would actually, in percent, be 5 zeros. So is that 100,000% more likely than Black African to contract COVID-19. Then, interestingly, most likely to contract this disease from the available statistics, this is just from the statistics they've given us, is Europe and Asia's, which are comparable. Europe's is like 18 something and Asia's is 19 something. But roughly 2,000. I mean, so much bigger that we can just, that's why you have the little wavy signs. It's about 2,000 times the rate of infection in Black Africa. So when you realize that Europe and Asia's rates are so close, you have to rethink you have to rethink it if you're one of these people that thinks that this was being used as a biological weapon against China or Asians generally by the United States or by European allies, whether that be Israel or any place else, or Germany or France. I mean, unless what you're saying is that the white people in the United States disconnected themselves from the white people in Europe and didn't care what happened to them. That isn't the evidence in history, though. They care about each other. It's hard to see. And not only that, so many white Americans, European Americans, travel back and forth that you are putting your own population at risk. But again, if you see that Europe and Asia basically have the same risk, how do you conclude that this was a biological weapon that was just designed to get Chinese and Asians, South Koreans, and so on? I don't know how you do that. I can't do it. I can't figure out a way to do that logically. Okay, so just before I move on to this next slide, I want to make sure that I covered everything on my notes. Okay. Now, this might be an opportunity, but what this is a news article. This is W. I'm not sure if that's Wall Street Journal. Should have checked that, but it's a very reputable news service. I'm not sure which one it is, but anyway, Senegal. Oh yeah, okay. I know what this is. Sorry about that. So when you start seeing the huge difference between the rate of infection in Black Africa and every place else, you have to start trying to hypothesize what the reason for that is, right? So the first thing people might think about is, well, the population in Africa is relatively isolated. Nobody really wants to go there. Nobody's going in and out of Africa, or Black Africa. And so they're not coming into contact with people who had it. It's very difficult for it to get imported because, they just stay amongst themselves and nobody really goes there. Well, there's not a small number of Chinese people in Africa doing business infrastructure work there. Not a small number at all. And you could say, yeah, but it is kind of small. I mean, compared, well, it's not really that small, especially if you tell us that COVID-19 is a highly contagious virus, and the way that it got introduced into other populations, including the United States, was just a few people coming into an infected area. Same thing with Iran. Just a few. Well, there's more than a few people, and I'm not talking about Europeans having gotten it from people who traveled to China. I'm talking about the Chinese themselves who have to be going back and forth. The Chinese are doing the infrastructure work in Africa, and yet the rate remains so low. So to me, that's not a plausible explanation, is the isolation of the African population. Second, you could say, well, the reason that they have such a low rate is that they're not testing. They just don't have the facilities to test people in Black Africa. Well, that seemed really plausible until I saw this article here. And actually, Black Africa is way ahead of the United States. If you read this article, it's way ahead of the United States in the ability to test. They've tested far more, a far bigger percentage of their population than the United States. Far more. Tested more than the US, but had, 217 times less positive results. Okay? And as a matter of fact, this particular article is about the fact that a Senegal research team constructed their own test that is the standard that is being duplicated by several international research organizations for its accuracy and its speed. It's a mobile test. And it's a handheld mobile test, and it's very accurate for not having false positives or false negatives. They're at the forefront of it, and people are copying them. And all over the continent, the part of Africa that is Black, south of the Sahara, they're way ahead of the United States. So you can't really say it's because they're testing less. You can't really say that, okay? We're still looking at these numbers, but we've ruled out 2 reasons they could be true. The third reason could be that they're young. Africa has the youngest population of any part of the world, which is a sort of a backhanded compliment. The reason their average age is so low is because the life expectancy is also low. But yeah, if you have a young population, we already discussed that. Youth is a protective factor, because you're not likely to have any underlying disease. So you'd say, well, people aren't getting sick, and so there's no need to take them to the doctor or clinic and then rule out this, rule out that, and test them for COVID-19. And that's the reason it seems like it's low. The infection rate could be pretty high, but since they're young, like the children here, they could test positive for it and have 0 symptoms. That could be the reason, except the reason you have to rule that out is because even with that being the case, we still know that many more people, a much higher percentage of the Black African population is being tested for this thing than in the United States. So you can't That's not a plausible reason either. All right, there's a third hypothesis by some scientists that COVID-19 does not do well in tropical climates, such as in Africa south of the Sahara. There's some tropical places in Latin America, and their rates are pretty low, but not as low as Black Africa. But I mean, that is a plausible reason. Let's see. Hang on, I know you hear paper. It's a plausible reason. But yeah, but see, here's the thing. They keep touting the similarity between the epidemiology and the biological or genetic RNA, whatever you want to call it, the biological structure of COVID-19 to HIV, which is said to have caused this thing called AIDS. But that's a whole different program, because AIDS was totally different in Africa because of the way they used statistics and the way they defined AIDS than it was other places. That's why it was predominantly a heterosexual disease in Africa, whereas not so other places. But I mean, if you're saying that COVID-19 is biologically, structurally very similar to COVID-19, if you're saying HIV is very biologically similar to COVID-19, and you're saying that the transmission, because of low infrastructure and so on, it should be similar, then why aren't we seeing a similar type of contagiousness? Even, and this is much more contagious, why aren't we seeing a similar type of contagion taking hold? We're just not. I forgot to turn off my cell phone. I don't know if you can hear that. It should stop in a second. It did. Okay. So once you dismiss all those reasons, the tropical environment, which didn't seem to be a barrier to HIV, which is supposedly very similar to COVID, the youth of the population, that doesn't hold because of the high testing rate. Same thing with the relative isolation, doesn't hold. Then the only thing that I can think of, and maybe you can think of another one that will be left, is that there is some inherent genetic resistance to COVID illness and or infection. And until I see evidence of Black COVID infection, African numbers going way up, or way up amongst Black people in the Caribbean, or even in the US as measured by phenotype. I mean, you can't be the Rudy Gobert type, or, you know, I have nothing against them, but I'm just talking about if we're talking about genetics that are associated with a certain phenotype. So yeah, like not the Lisa Bonet's, you know, not the Zendayas. Right now, my working hypothesis is that there is a higher resistance, much likely to have a higher resistance. Now, the statistics may turn out, if they don't start playing with the statistics and start saying the thing is mutated, because mutation is not as important as people think it is. It's very rarely important. Viruses mutate all the time. It's just a mundane fact of existence for microbes. But unless it turns out, without playing with statistics and definitions of the infection, it turns out that Black people start to really get a rate of infection that is comparable to other people on the planet, that's my working hypothesis. And I'll be glad to say that I'm incorrect if it turns out that way. And this virus has only come to world attention since late December. So we're talking about, what, 2.5 months? Late December to late January, late February. 2.5 months. So, you know, it could happen. It could catch up. But I'll be watching very closely to see how they're defining it, to make sure that they aren't playing with numbers like they did with HIV and AIDS. Okay, so that I don't have to manually change these slides, let me just put something on for you to just kind of look at as I'm talking. So when I say the impact, I've already talked about the health impact. Now let's talk about the impact that it should have on our behavior. And the first thing I want to address in terms of what our Black people's action should be in response to this announced pandemic is whether we, as Black people, should be concerned that Chinese people, which are a darker Eurasian than British or French, are being targeted as a form of white supremacy. I've already discussed why I think that's improbable, but it might still be out there, so people might still be thinking that. But should we be concerned about that? Well, I said no, we shouldn't be concerned about it. If two factions of people who are fighting over who controls you, why in the world would you take sides? Demonstrating that these are two factions of people who are fighting over who controls black people, particularly black people in Africa, is doing that in detail is not the subject of this video. I'll do that on another video at some future date. But as I've also said, I'm repeating myself, the rates of infection in Europe and Asia are very comparable. 18 and 1900 times that of black Africa. So yeah, it's very difficult to see how a logical case can be made that white Eurasians, because remember, Asia and Europe are on the same landmass. They're really one continent, Eurasia. Asia is not some separate landmass from Europe. There are the white Eurasians, and then there are the paler yellow Eurasians. And if they were, I just don't see how you make a logical case that the white ones are waging biological warfare against the pale yellow ones, given that they have comparable rates of infection. And that's whether or not you're talking about white Eurasians who are actually on the continent of Eurasia, in that part that's called Europe, or whether or not they're in North America or Australia or other places. What could be happening, what I think is happening, is what iconic British mathematician and philosopher, you may have heard of him, his name is Bertrand Russell. What could be happening is what he said should happen. He said it in 1952. You could probably find it on YouTube. And he said that you have to admit equality to the Asians. And to not do so would be to your demise, white man. They're not going to, they're on the level with us white Europeans. So, I think that's the evidence of all the statistics. If you look at life expectancy, whether it's of Asia compared to the Western countries, or if you look at to Europe, including Eastern Europe, because you have to put them in there too. You have to bring up the ghetto. You have to put the ghetto white countries in when you're comparing the areas, just like you have to put the ghetto Asian countries in. But yeah, if you look at life expectancy of West Eurasia compared to East Eurasia, that's what it looks like. If you look at wealth and income and health statistics in the United States, that's what it looks like to me. So it looks like to me like they're fighting for turf. It used to be Europeans over there doing infrastructure in Africa, and now it's Asians. So I just think that's probably what's happening. If it's a biological warfare, even if it were fighting for turf, white against pale yellow, I still don't see how you make a case for that, given that their rates of infection are comparable. If that's what, if that's how you're saying it went down. Now, it could be that this is sort of a formal way of bringing together on the world stage European and Asian biological scientists. In other words, to admit alliance and, equality. Could be that. It could be that they're co-conspirators. It could be that they're co-conspirators. These are just reasons that I think are plausible. It could be that there are some co-conspirators in China and co-conspirators in the United States or some part of Europe who wanted this thing unleashed in order to disentangle the economies, one side from the other. It could be that China got sick and tired of exporting and not getting paid adequately because there's a big trade deficit and there's debt. And so they've got their people working very hard and they're exporting a lot and they're not getting paid for it. And it could be that they said, well, we can turn our productivity in and increase our standard of living. And that could have been just fine and dandy with the United States to want to disentangle, because perhaps The Europeans over here and in European countries said, well, we need to go back to having our own production capacity and not be dependent on parts being manufactured and things being manufactured in whole in China. We don't want to be dependent upon them. We have the ability to produce this stuff ourselves. I know that we're used to things being less expensive by using them, but let's disentangle our productive capacities. And it could have been a win-win. So they both could have said, well, if you're talking about conspiracies, they both could have said, let's have a pandemic where everybody's kind of afraid to get stuff from China anymore. Because Mexico's got plants that are shutting down because they can't get parts. Everybody's afraid they can't get stuff from China anymore, so they start building their own productive capacity. And then China says, well, we'd rather turn inwards and work for ourselves anyway. Win-win. You're afraid of us for right now? That's fine with us. And as it stands right now, the epicenter of the pandemic is in Europe now. It's no longer in China. So they can get back to business and worry about themselves. And as they, excel even further, they can still keep doing business, but just not to the point where their economy is so dependent upon dollars and euros and so on. And the United States, also will benefit because there'll be more jobs here. I mean, if what you want to get into is a conspiratorial thing. Now, the thing is, it could be organic. It could really have happened. It could have really been what they call a zoonotic transmission from bats to humans. I mean, it's possible. Yeah, it could have been a spontaneous zoonotic phenomenon, transmission from one species to another. But it could be all those things. But one thing that I don't think it could be is the United States targeting China. Or even the United States, because if they targeted China, unless what you want to say is that China wasn't really the target, Iran was. Okay, I mean, you could say that, but Iran's rate of infection, although very high, get back to it, Iran's rate of infection, although very high, is not as high as Europe's. So, not seeing it. Okay, so should you be concerned and getting into all kinds of political discussions about white supremacy and how this is a proof that Asians are not white? I think I've given you facts that kind of squash that. Not kind, I think effectively does. Okay, so as a practical response to this announced pandemic, what am I suggesting? Well, if you are a black person, if you are young, as they say, and I think it was Nina Simone, if you are young, black and gifted, this is a time for you. And while it is true that if you are young and black, you are less likely to be working a job that has paid sick leave, or just leave if they happen to shut the place down for a while. It is also true that because you are young, and from the statistics, because possibly you are black, you are less likely to get sick. This is a virus that is much more dangerous to people 50 and up, particularly over the age of 65. That's why Italy was hit so hard. Not a lot of people are talking about it, but Italy has the oldest population in the world. Yeah, well, no, the oldest population in Europe, certainly. That's why they were hit so hard. Okay, now if you are a black person, particularly an American descendant of slavery or a foundational black American, you almost certainly have no savings or family wealth that you can fall back on if your place of business or your place of work shutters its doors. If you can't go to jobs on businesses that shut down, you almost certainly don't have any wealth or savings that you can fall back on. But you might be in that category of a young black person who's not getting sick, who can't take time off, but other people can who are not black. And so you might be asked to take on more advanced responsibilities at your job that others are too sick to perform. Or because of that, you may not be supervised in your current duties as closely because fewer personnel are available. so you can poke around and be nosy. You can learn new information and skills that could be valuable to us as a collective later on, learn how things work. So that when the people are down there in those holes, those manholes, doing infrastructure things for plumbing and electrical, that won't be a mystery to you, because you may have already, during this period of time, been able to open up quite a few areas on your computer system at your job and learned how things work. They are too busy for surveilling the virus and the crowd to look as much at Black people individually while this thing persists. Natural disasters are always a bit of a reprieve for Black people. So yeah, I'm asking you to take this time, if you are not sick and you are Black, rest up, but to learn more of the technical aspects of whatever industry you're in: transportation, sanitation, agriculture, forestry, fishery, crafts, related trades, assemblers, skilled trades like plumbing and electrical, anything in the armed forces. This would be a good time. Also, this would be a really good time to appeal any adverse action in a court or an administrative procedure, or an adverse action against you on the job. This would be a great time to appeal it, because everything is kind of postponed. There are a lot of courts that have shut down. This gives you more time to get your argument together for why you should keep your job, or why you should not be kicked out of school, or why you should not suffer a disciplinary action on the job, why you should get that unemployment insurance, why you should continue to get your, whatever it is, your disability, why, all kinds of things like that. This is a really good time to appeal adverse action, even if it's something like getting your utilities cut off. Because I know here in San Diego, the local power company said that they would not be cutting off utilities while this pandemic was in force. So you can kind of get your coins together. Traffic tickets, cutting of maybe somebody saying that you should have your food stamps cut or something. Any type of thing like that. It's a good time to appeal it. Now this one right here, which is not going to be on very long, that's got that little meme of the suspicious African boy. This is a really good time for us to try to combat what seems to be this inclination that we have, Black people all over the world have, towards xenophilia. Not xenophobia, xenophilia. We just can't shut out people. We're inclined to do the opposite of shutting out people who don't look like us. And so, however, when we see that these non-Black people have such higher rates of this pandemic than we do, I've seen where Senegal has already, is it Senegal or Cameroon? It's one of those countries. A lot of African countries are, for the first time, saying we're not gonna let you in. So they're doing what Donald Trump is doing. We don't want outsiders coming in here, and that may be a good first step to us just turning that around, to us adjusting, to us being able to compensate for the xenophilia, which has been, in my opinion, I've said this before, our ultimate downfall. That's the real reason for our downfall, because we just can't seem to get it in our head that the rest of the world is operating on this phenotypic basis. So I think this is a great time to accelerate that and really emphasize it, because even when this pandemic goes away, we still need to deal with that problem that we have. But I would say that the other thing we should do is kind of nothing, right? In a sense, well, it's not really nothing, because it's an active process to calm down. Calm down. They are using the word novel to describe this virus. Go back to where I can find it. So when you look in news stories, so here's an example. This is Al Jazeera. New cases of the novel coronavirus that emerged in the central Chinese city of Wuhan. Or when you hear it on the news, the novel coronavirus. And I listened to that probably 100 times before I figured out, because we all know what a coronavirus is by now, right? Corona meaning it has that crown from the sun around it, and it's a virus, and common cold and a lot of other viruses are caused by that. And SARS was a coronavirus. I'm not sure if Ebola was, but H1N1 was a coronavirus. Several strains of the flu are. But they kept saying the novel coronavirus. And, because they kept saying the novel coronavirus, the way they would say it with such doom. I thought novel meant like something really scary. Novel, because novel was being used as to mean scary. The scary superbug, like something mutated, like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles version of a virus that could just be like, the virus over here in I Am Legend. It's just gonna decimate the Earth's population. Something new, something totally new we've never seen before that has a possibility for decimation unlike we've ever seen. That's the way they were using it. But I just went back in time to try to track the use of the word, and I found out that the Chinese researchers who wrote the first report on it, they used the word novel in English. Though a lot of them are fluent in English, they were the first ones to use it. This is where I go back to you. This is being used against them because they kind of played along with the use of the word novel. Novel could just mean new. It could just mean that, but that's not the way that's not the connotation it's being given. It's being given a connotation that alarms us and makes us, making the public scared. So I would say when you hear that, disregard that. That might help you calm down because it's deliberately designed to alarm people, in my opinion. And I can't see how just Europeans or just white people in the United States are complicit in that. The other thing is be about self-help. Be about self-help, and I hope you know what I mean when I say self-help. It's not what the picture of what you're seeing here. This is a scene from I Am Legend as well at the end of the film. That's not self-help. That is not self-help. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I would encourage you to rewatch or watch for the first time the movie I Am Legend. It's a cautionary tale. Do not make the catastrophic, pathetic error. Will Smith's character, Robert Neville, I think that's his name, made twice near the end of the movie. He made it in this scene here, which is an alternate ending, but there's a very close scene to the regular one, and he made that error here. Focus on self-help. I don't want to be any clearer than that. As it is, this video might get shut down. Clearly, don't disregard the virus entirely. Keep yourself as hygiene as possible. Wash your hands often. Make sure that you clean in the best way that you can the surfaces that you touch often in and on the outside of your home and in your car. If you're going to a job, do all those things. Stay away from people that seem to be ill, because it's not like we have total immunity, right? Not like this guy here, Robert Neville. But calm down. And calm down, but again, use this as a time to help you become more suspicious and less diversity loving. Okay? And part of what will help you to calm down is understanding that the disproportionate alarm being caused by all the closures, because this is really something that's only affecting older people. And at this point, it's almost seeming like, when I say only, mostly, like overwhelmingly affecting older, non-black people. Now, I realize that a disproportionate number of us have underlying health conditions like asthma and diabetes, and what else? Asthma, diabetes. I think that's pretty much, hypertension, which they're saying is a risk factor, a small risk factor. But basically, this is something that is affecting older non-black people. And they're closing everything down so that they don't get infected by people who don't get sick from the virus, even if they contract it. So that's why the little kids can't go to school, even though they're not sick. Because they could be healthy carriers. And you don't want grandma and grandpa and great aunts and great uncles to get it. But the 24-hour news cycle, the use of the word novel, all of these things are designed to keep you alarmed. And they generally keep Black people in that state to begin with, because the more alarmed you are, the less calm you can be and the less you can focus on doing things that are constructive. But we don't need to be more alarmed than we generally are all the time anyway. I've taken to listening, because even before this thing became a big news story, I had so many things going on in my life that had to do with just a lot of different areas. And I had to do it myself because so many people were compromised. My close circle was compromised. And so I've taken to listening to an hour and a half of a guided meditation. I won't share which one it is because different things work for different people. But I listen to that every night before I fall asleep. And it's been really, really helpful for me. It's been really, really helpful for me staying healthy, I think. But in addition to meditating and staying calm and staying healthy, exercise is a great form of meditation. Daily exercise doesn't have to be extremely strenuous. Getting some sun, eating correctly, which means abstaining from alcohol at this time, and highly refined carbohydrates, or at least just cut back. If you can't stay away from the stuff entirely, cut back as much as you can without it causing you too much stress. All these things are things that can be the Black response to the novel coronavirus, COVID-19. I think I've already talked about not being alarmed about mutations. Mutations, as I've said, are a mundane fact of existence for all viruses. Instead of using the word novel, this is new. But there's nothing especially novel about it except that the way that it's being handled with all the shutting of things. But other than that, there's nothing particularly novel about it except the way that it's being handled, and perhaps that it is most dangerous to older, non-Black people. They're so used to putting the face of disease, being Black, and they're still trying, even despite the evidence. They're using novel. This virus is more contagious, they're saying, than SARS or H1N1 or MERS, but it is far less lethal, far less likely to kill you. Okay. Did a lot of number crunching. And if you find errors in my math, I'll be happy to take a look at it and correct myself. But I think if you take a cursory look at the maps, you see that I can't be that far off. These little dots are representing just small areas of infection. Feel free to comment on any way that you think is necessary, or any way that you think will be helpful on this video. Whether you think my commentary on the political mechanism for the virus was wrong and why. I gave you my analysis, but yeah, let me know what you think. And, as always, like, subscribe, donate as the spirit hits you. Thank you for watching and listening. Before signing out, I will say I encourage you to check on your Black relatives and neighbors over the age of 65 or any who have chronic health conditions. And again, remain calm and productive. When non-Black people are occupied with natural and man-made disasters, we have more unmonitored time. For March 16th, 2020, this has been the counter-racist evolving engineer Cree, signing out.